So here, this is where we get the samples, we receive the samples. They always come with the paper, information of the patient, and what's on the sample, for example. And they usually come in a glass with formaldehyde. And then we have to register them and give them a processing.
Okay.
And then here is some of the benches that we use for taking out the samples. And when we take out the samples, we put them in these cassettes with the patient number. And they also have a code that you can scan afterwards, because much of the process here is done by coding and scanning. So after this step, there's no patient information, there's no names basically.
Oh yeah, that's only anonymous.
Anonymous, only the sample of only the number of the sample. And we also have bigger benches for the doctors where they process the bigger samples like lungs or kidneys or intestines.
Okay.
Because it's divided in two. So the technicians do the smaller samples like the skin samples or oral samples, and the doctors do the big ones. And this is what their benches look like. And here are all their samples. As you can see, we have quite a queue now because it's almost summer, so everybody are busy with taking out as much samples as possible before the summer vacation comes.
Okay. Yep.
And then when we're done with this step, we have to process them, because when they come in, they're in formaldehyde. But we can't do anything with them in formaldehyde. We have to have them in paraffin so that we can work with them. So these are the machines that we use for processing. This one is called a VIP.
What's it called? VIP?
It's called VIP, Tissue Tech VIP. And this one is called Pelores. So in this machine we have 2 retorts for sample processing, and these only have 1 each. And we can process up to 300 samples or cassettes. And the running time for each process is 14.5 hours. So we put them on the end of the day around 3 o'clock, and then we process them throughout the night. So when we come in the morning at 7 o'clock, they're all done, so then we have to manually embed them or automatically embed them in paraffin. So when that process is done, we have to go either in here with the manual, with the automatic processing. So we put them inside the machine. Låses in fast.
Really? Completely stuck?
Yeah.
Oh, but it managed? Okay.
Sometimes the touchscreen isn't that efficient as you want it to be. So when we're done processing the cassettes in the VIP, we put them in these racks, and then we put them inside this machine here. So the machine heats it up, and then it takes it inside the machine and automatically embeds them for us. So we can take this So when they're done being automatically embedded, this is what they look like. So instead of doing it by hand, the machine manages to do it for us, and in that time we can save work time or rent workers, so we can do other things. When you do the manual embedding, and this is the station that we use, we put the cassettes in here for heating, because it's important that the tissue is warm before you can manually embed it, because the wax in here or the paraffin in here, it's warm. So it has to be a certain temperature for it to be liquid. And then when we manually embed it, we use these molds in metal.
Oh.
So we put the sample in the bottom, and then we add the wax or the paraffin, and then we put the cassette with the sample ID on top.
Oh, yeah.
So it keeps going all the way. So in that way we know what kind of tissue it is, and also how many cassettes there are in one sample. Because one sample, one patient sample can have like 1 cassette or up to 50 cassettes, depending on how big it is.
Oh my God.
If you take out an entire breast, it can amount to 80 cassettes sometimes, depending on how difficult it is to localize the cancer or not.
Wow, gosh.
And like the samples that the technicians take out, it's usually just 1 cassette per sample. And we have an ice plate where we put the mold on top so that the paraffin can become hard equally, so that the coldness comes up equally through the paraffin. Because if it doesn't freeze at the same rate throughout the paraffin, it can create cracks, which makes it difficult to section afterwards.
Ah, yeah.
So the wax has to be as smooth as possible when it's frozen. Let's see. And here, this is what it looks like when it's manually embedded.
Yes. So, thank you.
So as you can see, the cassettes are quite different from the automatic to the manual. In the manual we have like a plastic container that we put inside them, we clips them in. Whereas here they have a lid on top where the sample is inside. So in here we have processed a very urgent patient sample. So we just take the rack out, and then we close the lid, because now we have to take and clean inside the retort. So here it says that you have to do a quick clean, and these are the steps that we have. It's cleaning with tissue care, and then cleaning with 100% ethanol, and a drying station. So we just press run, and then it automatically starts. Then the machine asks you to place the basket back inside, because we also have to clean the basket before we can use them again, because the paraffin and the formaldehyde do not mix together, and they can also affect the processing step. And here it just says how long the cleaning step takes. It's 34 minutes, and we're gonna start it at ASAP. So now it's at the first step, which is the tissue care. So you can see that it's going to take from this container into this retort and clean it. And then when it's done with the tissue care steps, they'll go over to the cleaning ethanol and continue with that. So now that the sample has been processed, we have to manually embed it. And this is a small sample. It's just pieces of pistol biopsy, so they take it with a very thin needle. So for this I need a mold, a very small one. And this is the liquid paraffin. So I carefully take them out. And it's important that the tweezer is also warm and clean, because if the tweezer is cold, the sample would just stick to it, and it's impossible to remove it unless it's warm. And these kind of samples that are from needles are quite delicate, so you have to be careful when you take them out. And it's also important to make sure that you take everything that's inside the cassette as well, so that not any sample is lost, especially with so little that we have here. And now I'm just scraping the pillow that we use to put the samples in to make sure that there's nothing left. And when I'm done, I just break the upper part of the cassette off because we don't need that anymore. And this is a cold plate that we use because we have to make sure that all these pieces are on the same level for sectioning, because if they're on different levels we're going to section them, you might section off some pieces of the sample and you might not reach all the pieces at once. So then I just take it over to the cold plate and start pressing down carefully to get them on the same level. And as you can see that the paraffin is becoming hard and the tissue is sticking to the bottom. So when I'm sure that everything is on the same level, I take the top of the cassette with the patient number and add some more paraffin, because we also have to make sure that the cassette sticks to the paraffin and the sample itself. And you just press down while it's on the cold plate and maybe add a little bit more paraffin. And then you put it on to the freezing part. So after maybe 5-10 minutes, all the paraffin will be hard, and then we can take it off the mold. And these are just waste that we don't need to keep anymore, and we keep them in here so that when the person who is doing the coordination with the cassettes, when she has scanned them in at her station, she knows that it's okay and all the sample is there, and then she can empty this.